There's nothing more frustrating than an almost brilliant game. Enter Lost Sphear. To understand this throwback to the console role-playing games many of us grew up with, we have to take a brief trip down memory lane to 1995. Chrono Trigger was the black sheep of the Squaresoft RPG family, playing second fiddle to Final Fantasy and even the lesser-known Saga and Mana series in terms of sequels and follow-ups. All we got in the Chrono franchise was the Super Nintendo original, a loosely connected PlayStation sequel, and 2 ports of the original to the PlayStation and Nintendo DS. But most modern consoles don't have legacy ports of these once grandiose titles, as they further fade into our memory. Yet they're considered by those who played them among the greatest Japanese-style role-playing games ever crafted, weaving fantastic yarns of time travel and alternate dimensions, with lovable characters and enduring cities and locations, not to mention Yasunori Mitsuda's breathtaking scores for both games. It's a wonder no one has picked up the mantle and brought us the flavor and unique mechanics as those games did decades ago. Hearing whispers of a Chrono Trigger-like successor in the works, published by Square Enix itself, I could feel the embers of my bitter, stony heart stirring. This wasn't a sequel, nor was it even in the same universe, but the resemblance was clear. Beautiful old-school world maps, a clean design, colorful character roster, importance of character placement, lining up attacks and positional strategy in combat, and an emphasis on atmosphere and soundtrack. It sounded too good to be true. Created by Tokyo RPG Factory, a studio newly formed by Square to craft old-school style RPGs for a new generation, their debut project was I Am Setsuna. It garnered praise but struck many as an independent-style production in AAA clothing. And that's not always a bad thing, but it did ring a little hollow. Cut corners were noticeable, and there was an inescapable feeling of a humble budget at its foundation. So today I'd like to talk about Square's experimentation and their attempt to bring back the classic feeling of Chrono Trigger, one of my favorite games of all time, and how well this new beast fares against the classics of yesteryear. Let's do this. Lost Sphear aims to unearth the winning formula of classic games and make the improvements to gameplay, visuals, and story that 20 years of industry evolution could bring to the table. Chrono Trigger, like many other games of the golden age of RPGs, had a sincerity to it. Due to the sheer effort, talent, and hard work put into it, these were the AAA games of their era, after all. The Lost Sphear soundtrack is similar to the old Squaresoft games, with simple progressions and a leading riff to carry the song forward, aiding its memorability, akin to the recently popular Undertale soundtrack. The soundtrack to Lost Sphear is better than most, but compared to Mitsuda and Uematsu's masterwork, well, it's quite a high bar to clear. Lost Sphear has a charming art style mimicking the super deformed look of the classics, whereas on a console like the Super Nintendo, sprite size and animation memory were real factors and heavily influenced design choices. The limitation to 32-pixel sprites necessitated the exaggerated head size, body parts, and dramatic expressions. But this limitation also inspired the endearing art style. Most modern games attempt to settle emotions, and with the best of games, it works on many levels. But there is a charm in seeing the Chancellor literally drop his mouth to the floor, or seeing Chrono jump up into the air, arms outstretched with giant beads of sweat, at the smallest surprise. This spiritual successor tries to mimic the character model style of the old games, but implements them into a modern 3D engine. The advantage of having condensed characters is that you can show expressive and individualized models from a distant overhead camera. One thing missing, however, was the sharp detail that the state-of-the-art pixel graphics of the originals showcased. The 16-bit sound effects, though cruder and lower fidelity, carry much more impact when a sword is drawn, a critical hit is landed, or a power tech ability is used. Some abilities in Lost Sphear are satisfying, but the animations are fast, carry little weight, and don't use that time-stopping trick with a crunchy sound effect when landing a powerful blow to your enemies, something which made every critical hit and special attack in Chrono Trigger feel amazing. Lost Sphear seems to borrow many little cues from the classics of old. The starting town immediately reminded me of the beautiful golden vistas of Krista, from the lesser-known SNES classic Terranigma, but that could be a coincidence. The so-called Volko suits and steampunk mechs look and function a lot like the Magitech suits from Final Fantasy VI, and some combat abilities are throwbacks to Chrono Trigger, like X-Strike, Aura, and Cyclone. This new game recreates the workmanlike structure of the world, reminiscent of the sprites and tiles of classic RPGs, And though some areas look a little plain for a 2018 game, there are times when the camera pans down to reveal a gorgeous vista with minimalist and appealing architecture. It's in these moments when the visuals are truly inspired. The one area where Chrono Trigger excelled in is the variety of activity and locales you get to visit. Your journey spanned from the solitude of the Ice Age to a bright and beautiful Imperial Age fair, a desolate post-apocalyptic future, medieval fantasy forests, and Jurassic plains and mountaintops. This was partly due to the wide opportunity of locations available in a game about time travel though. I Am Setsuna was much smaller in scope and theme, but Lost Sphear learned some lessons from its predecessor. No longer constricted to snowscapes and piano solos, we're introduced to golden grassy plains, forests, deserts, and steampunk cities and castles, and the soundtrack was composed more like full orchestral melodies with much more instrumental variety, and at times, it does indeed sound spectacular. Lost Sphear is an unabashed throwback to the RPGs so popular in the Super Nintendo days of the early 1990s, but 2 decades of genre tropes colored the dialogue and stories of would-be successors. The style of tales told in earnest in the 80s and 90s now come off more like a tribute or a self-aware throwback. Most of the games of the era that inspired it begin with an initial incident, something to hook in the player and set the stage for the entire game to perform upon. For Final Fantasy VI, it was Terra's delve into the Narshe mines with other Imperial soldiers. When an Esper kills her captors and indirectly frees her from mind control, this catapults the story of her self-discovery, the long-standing conflict of humans and Espers, and the vile plots of those who seek to conquer both. For Secret of Mana, Randy is out exploring with friends, falls from atop a waterfall and stumbles upon the Sword of Mana. The ramifications of plucking it from its resting place brings on the monsters and dangers that get him exiled from his hometown and friends, to eventually saving the world from assured destruction. For Chrono Trigger, it started happily during the Millennial Fair. Chrono bumps into a fellow teen, and while at his inventor friend's demonstration of our newest creation, accidentally tears a hole in the fabric of time, leading his group to discovering mankind's future is doomed, and must now traverse time itself to repair the course of history. These are all great setups, and explicitly outline the framework of the pursuant story. So what do we have with Lost Sphear? Well, you see a king fighting in unknown ruins, but the world is soon consumed by white mist. Fast forward to some years later, in a small town, Kanata and his friends fight a few monsters, go out fishing, and their town turns white and non-existent when they return. Kanata figures out quickly that he can collect memories of each object or place that is lost, then consume those memories to restore it back to reality. Some memories are dropped by slaying creatures, others are collected by holding a button during dialogue, where an important line in a sentence is highlighted. He can restore entire lost locations on the world map, and in the various areas you visit during the adventure. This is a satisfying concept for the story, but the way it is executed throughout the game is a little dull at times. The game eventually builds a bit of mystery around these disappearances, and the clandestine actors who would take advantage of the situation for power, but the story needed to have a stronger catalyst, something that's gripping and creates a conflict to propel you through the rest of the story. Even the hook of restoring your own hometown is solved within the first hour or so. The characters lack a strong motivation. Most get along peachy until at least 5 or more hours into the game. A general guideline for compelling storytelling is to establish a protagonist, antagonist, and motivations early in the first act. Lost Sphear doesn't explore the main characters much, and there isn't much to keep you going beyond saving Kanata's hometown. Lazy dialogue transitions occur that have characters magically fade in and out of existence if they're not convenient to the plot at hand. One scene literally had the characters gawk about someone disappearing into thin air before their eyes, only to have one of them disappear right after that, since the game devs didn't know what to do with that character model at the time. Most 3D games get to use camera tricks to introduce characters that weren't present when you start a conversation. But in Lost Sphear, the game is dedicated to the old school overhead camera and does not shift or adjust during dialogue. It is, however, chock full of quality of life features, like quick saves nearly anywhere, fast forwarding cutscenes and dialogue, rewinding if you missed a line or two, and queuing up items in a shop for easy pricing before buying. One great feature they added is a dedicated party chat button, which often leads the player to where they need to go next, a hint system without banging you over the head constantly with a quest marker. But little of the lore is a mystery for long, sometimes with a solution or answer to a burning question in the very same room, or randomly one of your party members will rattle off obscure history, despite their previously unstated experience on the subject. Ridiculous detours and solutions like inventing a day-night cycle that had never existed in their civilization before, simply to sneak into a prison, or derailing the entire quest to find a stolen wallet, worked to defeat player immersion. Now let's dig a little deeper. One major factor of the experience and willingness to be engaged with a storyline is context. Action games and mindless shooters just need to establish how badass you are, and how much you want to destroy your enemies. But in a sophisticated and nuanced story, as you'd expect in a role-playing game, you'll instinctively desire character development, memorable friends, and notorious villains. Old-school video game stories were presented a little like stage plays. You had to emote loudly and clearly due to how small the characters appeared, and musical cues would drive the drama and emotion just as much as the actors themselves. Lost Sphear attempts to emulate these reactions and feelings with sounds and icons that pop up next to the character's head. But their faces and reactions change little during much of conversation, with long stretches of expository dialogue, sometimes repeating itself. Lost Sphear incessantly tries to explain what's going on in depth, rather than show it. Between the emotive faces, dramatic jumps, and cues, Chrono Trigger's story is told at its best through emotion, rather than words. A good example of this methodology at play is the moment the gang learn of the impending demise of their world. Marl runs around distressed, and you can feel her frustration in her movements, extending her arms, pleading to Luca and Chrono to do the right thing and save the world. Compared to a similar conversation about Lost Sphear's danger of the world being consumed by the mysterious Lost, and you'll see what the problem is. There's a little-known rule in graphic design. Your layout should speak what you're trying to get across without any words at all. This applies to storytelling as well. It's no coincidence that many movie directors are also painters. Composition and imagery can communicate a story stronger than words alone ever could. In many of Chrono Trigger's story sequences, you get the idea of what is happening through the visuals, music, and sound design alone, even if the dialogue wasn't there. This isn't the case with much of this spiritual successor. In the context of a 16-bit RPG from 1995, Chrono Trigger's hyperactive and to-the-point attitude toward the story works fantastically. Emotions are exclaimed, motivation is hammered home, and characters are more like simple archetypes than the mix of 1,000 subtleties of a real person. This is partly due to the less refined translation and localization efforts from Japan to the West back in the day. And with only a couple hundred pixels rather than a full HD screen, you could squeeze just a few words into the pixelated dialogue window. If these limitations were applied to many modern games conversations, it might require 100 or so clicks to get through a small chat. William Shakespeare once said, "Brevity is the soul of wit." Well, if that's so, designing and writing Chrono Trigger for a low-res and low-tech piece of hardware, then translating it from Japanese might have accidentally made this game's story execution brilliant. And in this way, it's almost unfair to compare a game from that era to a modern one. Not only is there no excuse to have well-developed characters with deep writing and world building, it's expected. When the lauded active time battle system was already stagnating after use in several games in the 1990s, players were dazzled by the subtle yet rippling changes Chrono Trigger introduced to the standard combat formula, popularized by games like Final Fantasy, Breath of Fire, and Phantasy Star. It used to be that exploring and fighting took place in different worlds, loading a miniature battle arena in unforeseen random encounters just for the fight at hand, and taking one out of the experience. Conversely, Chrono Trigger's offering was seamless. Whereas attacks in Final Fantasy were either single target or all targets, Chrono Trigger innovated on this front. Some special attacks hit multiple targets in an array or around a small area of effect. This made combat more strategic and calculated. You'd wait for enemies to move or shift before lining up your attack. Combined with allowing 2 or 3 characters to do special attacks or defenses in tandem, made for a battle system easy to pick up but difficult to put down. Player characters were expertly designed in look and feel, to have a strong personality both on and off the battlefield. Frog was the chivalrous knight who had tongue and sword-related attacks. Robo was the mechanoid from the future who fired rockets and lasers. Luca was an inventor who fought using her gadgets and flammables. Lost Sphear takes the simple combat design of Chrono Trigger and adds depth and complexity at every corner. This is easily the most welcome change it introduces. Modern graphics allow for a much wider battlefield to tacticize in. Attacks and spells come in all sorts, circles, rays, and squares. The area of effect is now clearly outlined in the battlefield as you plot it out. An excellent addition. The payoff of lining several baddies up to land an effective blow has been ecstatically reproduced here. Though the character design suffers, the sword-slinging main character, Kanata, might as well be a reskinned Chrono. His best friend Lumina fights with her fists and has an assorted set of abilities. Locke uses a bow for range attacks, but is quite similar to Van's ranged weapon, though lacking his expanded spellcasting mechanics. They're different enough, but the strong identity and distinct feature set of each character is grayer than in the games that inspired it. The touted Volko suit system is a bit of a miss for me though, as all it does is drop your character into a mech with a party-shared monopool. There are some unique abilities, and the famous double text from Chrono Trigger emerge here somewhat, available only to pairs of characters inside their Volko suits. In the end though, it works. Simple, fast, moderately tactical combat that gets you in and out of fighting quickly, just like the classic that inspired it. Lost Sphear ties in its story with an interesting progression mechanic, which involves crafting passive upgrades on the world map out of memories. This is meant to reflect the restoration of the world that happens throughout your adventure, and is fine, if only a minimal impact on your effectiveness. The Sprite Knight system, as borrowed from I Am Setsuna, is like a simplified version of the beloved Materia system from Final Fantasy VII. With this, you can combine special abilities, counters, and triggers together for a more tailored skill set. Other layers of depth thrown in include upgrading weapons and armor, and the momentum system sees a bar fill up over time during combat when you wait, attack, or get hit, with up to 3 pips appearing for each character. You can activate those in real time at the press of a button to bolster an attack, or activate a special effect on your spell, or save it up as a requirement for one of your Sprite Knight setups. And there are peripheral systems like food crafting and sublimation, which permanently adheses a momentum bonus to a Sprite Knight spell after continued use. There's an attempt at making a fleshed out system with many intricacies here, but it just feels like a what about this too design, rather than distilling what works and what doesn't to an elegant core set of mechanics. Chrono Trigger's combat wasn't complex, but there weren't needless complications added for the pursuit of depth. Chrono Trigger's scenario design was varied up in each new area you went to. You could be trying to plead your case in court one minute, only to be sneaking around guards the next, figuring out the controls to a crane or memorizing a password, or just playing around with carnival attractions for fun and rewards. Unfortunately, Lost Sphear relies too heavily on the basics. Walk around, talk to NPCs, buy equipment, fight a few monsters, repeat. It's consistent and uninventive, with just a slowly expanding set of tools rather than innovative scenarios around each corner. Though touting more complex and arguably deeper combat, it doesn't vary up its set pieces and mechanics as much as it could to keep things new and interesting. One minor annoyance is the fact that items outside of chests reappear when re-entering areas, making their acquisition seem trivial. But easily the biggest gameplay problem with Lost Sphear is its chaotic difficulty settings. I was breezing through enemies, so I had to set the game to the highest difficulty. It was more satisfying this way until I hit a sudden boss fight, which was nigh impossible, with a single target performing one-shot kills multiple times before any of my 4 characters could act. Thankfully, you can swap difficulty on the fly, but this overcompensation of enemy turn speed and damage is way out of proportion, and makes for a rocky road for those wanting a moderate challenge. Lost Sphear has the content for dozens of hours of gameplay, but is there adequate quality, variety, and new mechanics to hold your attention for that long? It's been compared to free-to-play and mobile games, which have notoriously muddied the waters of what the broad audience considers good value. You can play solid games for next to or literally nothing, but it's the hidden costs and manipulative game design that coerces people into coughing up money that becomes the true cost of some of these free-to-play games, your wasted time. How much a game should cost is subjective. Some of my most played games have been under $10, and some of the shortest campaigns I've enjoyed have been over $40. To expect a $1 per hour conversion of gameplay is a bit ridiculous. If that were the going rate, games like Wolfenstein: The New Colossus and Uncharted would go for about $10 to $15 at release. So my thought on the matter is that price should reflect quality, whether concentrated in a tightly knit, exceptionally acted and linear movie-like storyline, or spread out over many repeating or similar mechanics and gameplay, like a large open-world RPG or a survival game. Bigger budget games need to recoup their development costs, and so by necessity are priced higher. But in cases like No Man's Sky or Lost Sphear, The apparency of being a low to medium budget indie-like game makes the AAA retail pricing unpalatable. Lost Sphear is a good game, but the fact that it isn't a great one frustrates me. I desperately want to see a high-quality, old-school Japanese RPG like this to succeed and prove decades-old game design brilliance can shine once more. But in today's market, this title will be perceived as unremarkable and overpriced. Tokyo RPG Factory's heart is in the right place. They have all the right ingredients here. Heart, a simple storyline, a colorful world, and an engaging combat system. It feels more like a Golden Age RPG than pretty much anything out there I've played for years, even negating the changes that games like Final Fantasy VII and Chrono Cross made, such as flow-breaking combat with overlong animations. It gets about 75% of the way to becoming a successor to my favorites of the era, but it falls short in terms of a gripping story, emotion, or a consistently compelling drive forward. I enjoyed much of this game, but I can't help but feel there are many other games your average consumer would rather spend their hard-earned $50 on. And it seems Japan didn't jump ship for the game either, selling about a fifth of the copies of I Am Setsuna. So it seems to be a niche title, priced or mispriced as such. Will this game revive the dying niche of traditional JRPGs? Probably not, but it's a glimmer of hope to those wanting to see a glorious revival of this style of game. And I for one applaud it as such. Let's hope that Square Enix and Tokyo RPG Factory give this almost winning formula another shot. And hey, third time's the charm, right? So you stayed through the whole video. Good on you. Let me know in the comments what you thought of Lost Sphear, the JRPG genre, or what you'd like to see in the future. My deepest appreciation to my amazing patrons who help make these videos possible. And thank you so much for watching.